So welcoming back Jim Park to South Australia, Victor Harbour. Jim's going to go through how to tune your recurve out of the box. This is going to be a two-part session so we can break it down a little bit. This is the first part. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Pat. So you've just got your recurve and you want to set it up. And I'll show you what I do. And it is written on, again, a couple of sheets of paper that Pat has. And I'll basically step through what's on those couple of sheets. So, we've got the, in fact I'm going to use my recurve, and it's not straight out of a box, it's one I've been shooting for some while. What I recommend when you get a recurve is have the archer set it to about midway in the draw weight. Most recurves are weight adjustable. I'd normally try to set it about mid in the draw weight, because when we come to tune the bow, or buy arrows to set the bow, we want to have a little bit of adjustments to make sure we can make things work properly. And with a little bit of latitude in the draw force, very handy. So we have a bow. Also, most bows, I think most bows now have adjustable draw force. They also have adjustable limb alignment. That'd be true for most, I guess, Pat?
The majority, yeah.
Majority. They don't always adjust in the same manner, but they've pretty much always got some adjustment laterally at the ends of the limbs.
Can you expand on that mid draw weight thing?
I just set it in the middle.
Oh, you mean tiller bolts?
The tiller bolts here I'd set right in the middle, and this adjustment I would start right in the middle, and in fact that's how this bow came out of the box. That adjustment was set right in the middle, and I could look at the clearances on the adjustment there, mighty close to be the same, so it's very close to be right in the middle, and the same on this end. Now we're going to use that adjustment to change the angle of the limb. Now as it happened, when I got this bow and these limbs, that's how it came out of the box. I strung it up and it was right on. So the adjustment I'll talk to you about, I really haven't had to do with this bow, but we'll check, did I do a good job, and is it still in line? We'll check that, and I'll show you how I'll check that. So let's get the limbs out. Make sure I put the top one in the top and so on. There must be a bottom one. And we want a string. Over string. Now, a very important thing of the string is it has some twists in the string. I want there to be twists. I'm not fussy as to how many twists, but there must be twists. How many would you normally put in a recurve string, Pat?
3/4 of a twist per inch.
3/4 of a twist per inch. I'd be very comfortable with that. What I don't want to see is no twists. No twists, it'll shoot horribly and the string won't last. So it's got to have twist in it. And I have to say that I've seen people at world level tournaments turn up with no twists. That's awful, but I've seen it several times. Must have twists. One of the little tricks we use with recurve strings is every time we take it off the bow and put it away, we put one loop through the other and then the first loop through the other one again. And so that's locked the two strings together. That's locked my twist in. Right? So that's important. But must have twists. So otherwise the bow's not going to shoot properly and you're going to wear out the string. So we'll put the string on, up the right way I hope. I'll be good and use a bow stringer. Usually the string for a recurve bow is 3 inches shorter than the bow. So this particular one's a 68-inch bow, so the string should be 65 inches. If we got it right, we'll take this knot out of the bowstringer. You should really use a bowstring. It's much easier on the bow, and you're less likely to damage things. I'm in an inept bowstring, as you can see. Upside down. Get on there. Now, we're going to say what length string do we want. A few ways I judge that is I look at how the string is sitting on the recurve. So this string is 3 inches shorter than the bow, 65-inch string, 68-inch bow, and that should be right. And I'm looking to say how much is sitting on the recurve. Like I don't want a bow like that, and I don't want it sitting off like that. So that to me is about the right amount on the recurve. Now I know we get some bows with extreme recurves, and first I don't like them. I don't think I think this design is better. This sort of design about that much on the recurve. Now that's giving you about what the manufacturer suggests for the brace height. So this is about what the manufacturer suggests. But I'll come to how we make it exactly what we want it to be later. Again, so remember, got to have twists in the string. Very important. Next thing I would do would be to measure the tiller. So I'm just measuring from the bottom of the limb straight across to the string, just with my finger. And you can see I've set that exactly the same. I think for modern bows, they should be set the same. If you go right back, 30 years or so when we shot bows that didn't for example, one-piece bows, they often shot there with a larger tiller on the top than on the bottom. But if you look at how the limbs are made nowadays, they're pretty much exactly the same limb. They shoot nicely if that is the same distance. So I just said I'm exactly the same tiller, no difference. Yes.
What about cheaper limbs?
Cheaper, I do the same. Yeah, I do the same. I'll come to one a little bit later, and where you might get into trouble if you might have to change that. Right, so I'm setting that and that to be the same, and this to the manufacturer's specification, and it should look about like that much string on the recurve. Next thing we want to do is to say, are the limbs straight? So let's stick it in the. What do I do with that? To take that off?
Yep. Just squeeze in the end,
Put that in there.
and then you can adjust the ball depending on how you want this.
I'll just look from the top of it. Just like that will do. Now what about that? I just want to look at the, actually we'll tip it down a little bit this way. Down to there will do. Oh yes, that will do, yep. Then I want to be able to look along the bow like this, and I'm going to line where I'm standing, I'm going to line the string up with, I'm trying to take the hole in the limb adjusting the back of the back hole here, and that hole. I want the string through both of those if it's correct. If I line it up with one and it's not on the other one, then we've got some adjusting to do. So hopefully that's let me have a little look. I think that's pretty close right down the middle. And also we're trying to say, with the strings lined up with those holes, is it down the middle of the limbs? So if I look at this bow, I'll stand back here, about here, and have a look at that. That looks to me to be pretty close. That's how this one came out of the box. They'd all come out of the box like that, but this one came out like that. So what that's telling me is, so far I don't have to make any adjustment to the bow. So far, there's still a few other things we might have to adjust in that respect, but that to me is what I'm looking for. So you might want to have a look at that if you're not familiar with what that should look like. Well, happy with that? What that should look like? That's pretty basic, I think.
Do you use the blow blocks?
I don't use the bottom block, but I like to stick him on the limbs and look at the alignment. Yeah, I'm happy with those. I just happen not to do it. I just eyeball it down the limb, because ultimately it's not incredibly critical. Yeah, as long as it's pretty close, I'm happy, and that's, well, mine's mighty close, so I think I'm perfectly happy with that. Now, if that alignment was not right, if it wasn't going through both of those bolts and down in the middle of the limb, what that would be telling me is one of these adjustments is not right. And I've got to make an adjustment, sideways adjustment in one of these. The question is then, which one? Well, you can reason out which one it should be, but in the end, you can just then adjust one and see what it does. See whether it moved. If it moved the wrong way, then move the other one, or move that one in the opposite direction. So you can, if you think about what the alignment, which one you should move, and think about what the result should be, you can deduce which one to move. But if all else fails, just make a small adjustment and see what it does. All right.
You're just strung or unstrung?
You do the test strung. As an engineer, I like to take the load off it when I'm doing an adjustment. So I know they say you can do these things strung, but you know, the engineer in me tells me that I'd rather do adjustments when there's no force on them. So I don't string it. I know that's inconvenient, but I think it's a bit gentler on the mechanics. Now the next thing we've got to do is we can have the limbs looking like they're perfectly straight and in line, but is the riser twisted this way? Yeah, we can have these adjustments such that the string looks like it's going right down the middle, but the riser is actually twisted. So we've got to have a test for that. Now there are several tests for that are quite good. One you can do is that these bows, if I get an indoor arrow and put it across the riser, on the flat bit of the riser just above the arrow rest, hard against there, it should be just clear of the string.
It's a 23 thickness.
23 thicknesses. Right, so this is a 23-15 indoor arrow that I'm just holding it on the riser, on the flat bit, under the clicker, because that would muck it up, and it's barely just off the string. So that's telling me that the riser is oriented correctly. That's a good test. Now I know that works for a Hoyt riser. It will only work if that surface is flat, of course. If you've got a bow where that surface is rounded a bit, of course that test won't work. So you've got to be a little bit careful, but I know on a Hoyt that will work. Okay. Now the next test, the other test you've got for that one, which also works pretty well. Normally I'd take the V-bar off, extension off, and do this one. Where's what I've got? I've got a stabiliser that I know is machined accurately, so that the bolt is true to the shaft. I know that. Not all stabilisers you can trust, but this one you can trust. So I'll screw that in and say, normally I do it without the V-bar bit on. Then I'd look and say, if I again line the string up with the two limb weight adjusting holes, is it down the middle of the stabiliser? And it really is. All right, if you want to have a look at that, that's also a good test. So we get the string visually lined up with the two machined holes. Is it also down the middle of the stabiliser? And it's really, really close. Okay, so what that's telling me is that the riser is oriented correctly. So that's telling me for this bow, I don't have to make any adjustment to the lateral position of the limbs. So that, oh lucky, that's how this one came out of the box. But those are the tests I did to say, do I have to adjust anything? No, I don't. So that's good. All right, question about that one?
Because if that wasn't right, that'd bugger up your centre shot then as well.
Oh, I haven't got to centre shot yet.
No, but I'm saying if you didn't have
Yeah.
that alignment,
Yes, it will.
if that was out in the first
Can,
place.
yes. Now, next I put the Bros pressure button in. And an arrow. Question is how far in and what pressure should we have it? I'll put it back in this device. Knock it under the clicker so that it can, let's lower that down a little bit so it's set.
You want help?
I think we're right.
You've got to do it up quite firmly. It's only holding on a ball.
Now, but you might want to have a look at this one, but I've got this one set, it's barely outside centre.
So, by saying that, Jim, could you draw that on the whiteboard? Because
Yeah, I can draw that.
sometimes people, I've noticed when I'm trying to explain that, sometimes people don't actually know what we're explaining.
Pressure button coming through here. And I've got a string line, got the string down here through those two machine holes in the riser. Put an arrow on here, and looking at the point of the arrow, my point of the arrow is lining up about there. Now, I have to say that the adjustment of that position is not critical to the tuning of the bow. Not critical. All right? You can have the bow completely tuned and move that in and out and barely change the tuning of the arrow. But what it does change is you move that in or out, it changes the position of your sight. If it's in too far, your sight will go behind the bow window. If it's out too far, if this is out too far, your sight will be out too far. So I put that in and out in just an amount so that my sight's in a convenient location, but it's outside the line of the centre of the bow, not inside it. All right. So that's that one.
Excuse me, Jim. Always thought that the arrow shaft goes just to the outside, tip of the arrow
Just-
to the thing.
Just
Have you got it actually in, like, just the point, maybe 2-3 millimetres out or something?
it's very much. Come and have a look. It's only a tiny wee bit out. Now, as I say, it's not critical. It should be out that side,
Yep.
not inside. But mine's very close to lined up.
Okay.
I was very close. Now I say it's not a critical adjustment, and I've more got that position there. I want it close to centre, but I also want it so that my sight's in a convenient position in and out. All right.
Non-critical adjustment in terms of the flight of the arrow,
It's not critical
but
in
it affects your sight.
it moves.
From hearing a row, if it's too far out, your sight's got
It'll be a long way out.
to be a long way out.
Yes, and if it's too far in, the sight goes behind the bow window.
Gotcha.
But from the point of view of the arrow behaviour, the distance that is in or out is not critical.
Don't get too fussed about that.
Don't get too fussed about that. But the one you do get fussed about is what's the tension on it.
Yeah.
Now you want to have a feel of the tension I've got on mine. It's quite firm.
So what, when they come straight out of the box, literally you've opened up a new Shibuya button or biter or whatever you've got.
I said it, like they come, how many springs do they have? If you get a biter pressure button, they come with 3 springs.
Jesse, no better than me.
How does a Shibuya one comes? It's got at least,
Usually have them at the
it's got at least 2 springs, 2-3 springs. 3 springs? 2. Righto, well, on the bottom one I would never go using the light spring. I would go the middle spring, or Shabu, you'd go probably the lightest spring, set about halfway.
Okay.
And we will be changing that one. You say mine is set, I'd say that's furbish, but you might want to have a feel of what mine feels like. About 37 at the moment.
Will bow weight,
37.
will that affect, like if you get something with a lot lighter bow weight, does that change what kind
I
of?
don't want it too light. I want to move finish. 37. Okay, now, so those who felt that will be firmish. When I get out of the box and put it in, I'm going to not the weakest spring you get in a bite. It's too weak. If a Shibuya, which this one is, obviously got a lighter one there as well. This is not the strongest spring. It's the other spring, and I'd start off with a set in the middle. So normally, out of the box, I would have it a little bit lighter than that, but not too light. We don't want to end up with a situation where that is very, very light, because then we can get into clearance problems. Much less likely to get clearance problems if it's a bit firmer. Okay, so we've got that in position. Then we've got to put the arrow rest on. Now, in putting arrow rest on, you need to have a little bit of clearance so that the arrow rest blade is not fouling on the button. Okay, so that's quite clear. And we want to have the arrow sitting so that it's about the middle of the button. Now, as the dynamics of these things is as you shoot, the first thing that happens is the arrow rises a little bit. It'll come up a little bit by maybe 1 millimetre or so. So don't set it so that you're right up the top of the flat area of the button. It's you're down towards so the arrow's on the middle of the button. We've got the end of the button here, and we want the arrow to be sort of like that. We don't want the arrow up there. Now, next thing we have to do is we've got the arrow shaft, and we've got the blade of the arrow wrist coming out. We don't go much past the edge of the arrow shaft. No, we don't poke it way out here, for example, because then we can end up with clearance problems. How far is mine poking out? I can, like looking from here, I can just see the tip of my arrow wrist blade. Have a look if you want to. But the other thing I've done is on the end of the wire, I'll put a slight upturn in it. I've added that. Now the reason I've added that is I've got a shooting machine, and I use the shooting machine for recurve as well as compound. And if I shoot this one with the shooting machine without that teeny little turn up on the arrow rest, I get lateral scatter on the target because it's the arrow's free to move a little bit at full draw. So I've just put the tiniest turn up just to stop that movement. You can have a look if you want.
Well, you just do that.
Yes. It's very little. Maybe I've got a little bit more turn up than I'd be happy with, but the tiniest little bit of turn up just to keep the arrow firmly against the button.
Just a little thing.
Tiniest little turn up. Probably half as much turn up as I've got on this one.
Yeah, right. And you're saying that'll help to stop lateral movement?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Now the reason I put that, you see how much I've not got much past the arrow.
Yeah.
Very little. Okay, happy with that?
That's right. Yep.
Don't worry about it. Now, so that tiny little turn up, before I put that on, shooting this in the shooting machine, like a shooting machine gets wonderful groups, but they're a little elongated like this. Because I thought I was getting a little bit of movement on sideways on the arrow sitting on the rest. So I put that tiny little turn up and the groups went from that straight to round. Right, so that's a good one. Now when you've got the archer shooting, of course you might not notice that, but shooting machine you sure notice it.
The shooting machine, you're not getting that.
Oh yes you do, I've got the shooting machine set up to
Okay.
do all that, so it shoots it properly as it should.
It's not a compound release you're using.
I'm using a compound release but not with a D-loop, and I deflect the string. So when I shoot with the shooting machine, yeah, that's the arrangement I use, but then I've got a bar that pushes the string off the side to simulate coming with the fingers, and I use a peep. So it shoots just like I do, and I found without that tiny little turn up,
Okay.
groups were not as good. Okay, what are we up to? We've got to put a, well you'll notice I use a bow sling. And I quite deliberately got, there's two reasons I use a bow sling. And one of them is I can't lose it. It's always the right size. And the other reason I use it is that it doesn't put any side force on the bow. Now you put the finger sling, which most recurvists use, that often puts side force on the bow and twists it. So I do not like finger slings. I would always do this. Yeah, it costs nothing. You can't lose it. It's always the right size, so it's always there. Better arrangement. Next thing we're going to do is go put a knocking point on. And what I do for a knocking point, the first thing you've got to get the knock fit right. And you can see that's I can move it up and down, so I'm not going to, in twisting the string as it might twist on my fingers, I'm not trying side force on the arrow, and yet the arrow's not going to fall off. So the size string that Pat makes will be right. Okay, then the knocking point, where do we start? What I do is I start, remember I've got the tiller set the same top and bottom, and I put the knocking point, I start off 3 millimetres above square.
So that's the top of the bottom knocking point.
If I put the arrow on exactly square,
Yep.
I raise it by 3 millimetres.
Okay.
Okay.
So
So
top of the bottom.
if I put the arrow on exactly on square, move it up 3 millimetres, tie the knocking points on it.
Okay.
And you'll notice I've got 2 knocking points. That's very important. Must have 2, and you must have a little gap between them. Not much of a gap. I'd say at the moment that gap now on mine's a little bit too much. I'd be happy to have maybe half that gap. But the way I shoot, I can get away with having that gap. Now, I think it's very important to use tie-on knocking points, never metal ones, never metal ones. So you must, I think a fundamental skill for an archer is to know how to tie one of those knocking points. Yeah, we must learn that, you must be able to do that, fundamental skill. All right, and it must be 2, one above, one below. What else do we need to do? Sight. Now, with a sight, put the sight on. Now, how far in or out should we have it? Now, there's advantage in having it. Well, I shouldn't mind there. Now we say, how far should that be? Well, the first thing is that we say, what's the longest distance we have to shoot? And we must be able to get the sight low enough to deal with the longest distance. That's, of course, important. But the other thing that's handy is that, remember the previous seminar we talked about technique, and I said the very great importance of the bow hand. The bow hand, you must have the force on the thumb muscle lined up with that joint. Yeah, that's got two really important aspects. One of them is that you don't use arm muscle, so you don't get tired, and you're stiller. That's really important. The other reason it's important is that if you've got that force only here, you're not going to twist the bow. That's important, Pat.
So something you taught me ages ago about sights, and it's made a difference to me when I shot recurve, was I set my sight up for 10 metres more than what I was going to shoot my maximum distance in case I've got a headwind.
Yep.
And it did make a difference because I've had to use it.
Clearly important. So you've got to be able to get it low enough down that you've got ample clearance at your longest distance. But the other thing is, I've said on the bow hand position, you must have the pressure on your thumb muscle lined up with that joint. And what we're trying to do there is first not to use any arm muscle, but we're also trying not to twist the bow. Now, we might still twist the bow. You know, when we're under pressure and straining a bit or whatever, we might twist it. And if we can have the sight out about that far, we can cancel out the effect of the twist. All right? Now, that distance out can vary bow to bow to bow. But I've known for 30 years that having that at the right distance, you could cancel out the effect of twisting the bow, and I've done it forever on compound bow. But if I go back into the 1990s, trying to do it on a 1990s recurve bow, that wasn't far enough out. It had to be out here, and then of course you can't get the sight down low enough for your longest distance. But I try that on this modern bow. That distance, I cancel it out. Right, so that distance for me, I completely cancel out the effect of any inadvertent twisting of the bow, and I can get my sight low enough for my longest distance. I couldn't get it low enough for 90 metres, for example, but I don't shoot 90 metres. I shoot 70 metres. So if I'm shooting 90 metres, I have to have it in further.
What's the process of testing for that?
The process for testing that is to shoot one without twisting it at all, and then shoot one with it twisted a little bit, and see whether you hit the same place.
At distance or?
10 metres, indoor. Yeah, there's plenty of distance. You fix it for one distance, you fix it for all of them. All right, same with compound. What else have we got? Next thing I would do would be fix up my stabilisers. Now you'll notice I don't have an extender for my V-bar. I went to a really interesting seminar once by it was the owner of Win and Win. A good seminar, I enjoyed it a lot, but I should have Hoyt, but never mind. He gave a good seminar, and we of course asked him about the V-bar extender. Was one very necessary? And his comment was, it's very important because everyone's $10. Right? I think I agree with that. I don't use one, but then we've got to set up the stabilisers. And what I'd like to do in the stabiliser setup is not have the weight too high. One of the big mistakes that recurve archers in particular make is holding the bow at different angles, shot to shot to shot. They vary that cant angle. And that moves the arrows across the target. It takes away a lot of score. So I would have the weight a little bit lower, because then we're using gravity to help us stop doing that. Happy with that? What else have we got to set up on the bow? I think we're set up. We're ready then to shoot it, yeah.
The alignment of the...
Oh, sorry, there's one, there is
front
one
side.
other, that one, there is one other thing we should cover. Now, when the archer holds the bow, we don't necessarily hold the bow vertically. We hold the bow at whatever angle we just happen to hold it, whatever, you know, our geometry and our muscle structure, etc., holds the bow. And that's the angle you want. That's the angle your body wants to hold it. but we need the sight bar to be vertical. If the sight bar is tilted, every time we change distance, we've got to move the windage in and out. We don't have to do that, so that's really annoying. So we want the sight bar to be vertical, but we want to hold the bow. We want the bow to be whatever angle we naturally hold it, because that helps reduce that variation. All right. Now, what I do there is, for example, on my compound bow, I have the sight bar ever so slightly out that way. As I hold my compound bow tilted slightly like that. So then I change the angle of the sight so that my bubble is level and my sight bar is vertical. Sorry, I should hold it like that. So my sight bar is vertical at the natural angle I hold the bow. Now again, with recurve, you want to do that. You haven't got bubble level, etc., but there'll be a natural angle you hold the bow at. You want to get someone to stand behind you with a spirit level and make sure that at full draw, that is vertical. Now it might not match up the angle of the bow. So for me, my compound bow, it does not. This one, it's pretty close to the same. And that will take away a lot of that variation, and that will help the score a lot. Anything else before we get on to tuning it?
The angle of the bow, just go back to that.
Yeah, but we'll get out the V-bars. Take it without all the stabilisers. These ones aren't angled down much. I'd rather them angle down a little bit more than I've got them on this bow now, because I realise how important that variation is. We'll get out the whole shebang. We're going to need it later anyway. I would tend, like that, they're angled down. I wouldn't be too fussed even if they were angled down a bit more. So what I'm trying to do is to get the weight down low so that gravity is helping me hold it at the same angle every shot. Where's my balance point? My balance point is sort of here-ish. Another important one for recurve bow is you'll notice I don't have too much weight on the stabilisers. And if you recall the previous session, we're trying to keep this shoulder always low, always low. Now with a recurve bow, we've got two forces to think about. We've got the force of the bow at full draw. Now this case is about 37, 38 pounds, and we've got the weight of the bow itself. And together they give a force that's sort of angled down a little bit, the resultant force. If that resultant force is below my shoulder joint, it pushes my shoulder joint up. That's bad, then I've got to hold it down. If that resultant force is above my shoulder joint, it pushes it down, that's good. So we don't want the mass of the bow to be too much, otherwise it's pushing the shoulder up. So you see, I don't run nearly as much weight on recurve as I would. I run much more weight on a compound. Recurve, I'm trying to keep the whole mass weight down a little bit because it helps me keep my shoulder down. Anything else?
Is there any particular point now that you get your stabilisers on there, as you were saying before, about the balancing of the bow to any particular point on the bow itself? Like, is it right under the...
Well, this one's about, well, it's down on that line.
Yep.
And it's, so it's, my balance point's about here.
Yep.
I certainly want it lower than the grip. I wouldn't mind it being even a bit lower. It helps me get it that consistent. So I say what I would do there is I would angle these down a bit more this way. So this one I can't. That would be where I'd go now. All right. Anything else before we get on to the tuning?
Call that the end of part one.
Part one.